This is the Supreme Court of the state of Alabama. It's the tip of a judicial iceberg that reaches into every county, every city, and every home in the state of Alabama. The justices of the Supreme Court have the final say on any legal matter that comes up here in Alabama. But it's the system itself that concerns most of us in our day-to-day lives. It's the system that we come in contact with on a day-to-day basis. This afternoon, we're going to talk about that system. We're going to talk about its functions, its problems, and its future with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, C.C. Bo Talbert. But first, we're going to talk about you and about your perceptions of the Alabama court system.
Then the public perception appears to me to be positive. The problem that we have observed in the past is that people don't understand what courts are all about, and they then think that it is some mysterious sort of governmental operation. In truth and in fact, it is very open in the public. It is handled in a fair way, fair to the extent that both sides to a controversy are permitted to tell their story at the same time and then cross-examine each other's story. So it's structured to be fair. When the public understands it and sees it, I feel better about it.
Alabama, unlike most states, literally picks up the state Supreme Court, moves it out of Montgomery, and takes it out where the people can actually watch it. Obviously, you think that the public perception of the courts and of the Supreme Court specifically needs help. What have you accomplished? What are you hoping to accomplish? And how do you feel about what's happened so far in these areas?
Well, we're really trying to do two things. We're trying to bring the system of justice closer to the people. When I was a child, I can remember when court was held, many citizens went to court and filled up the courtroom and observed how the courts were being handled, how cases were decided. That doesn't happen very much. And so instead of coming to court, we sit in Montgomery, that's the seat of the government. But we think we've got an obligation not only to be here, but also to go to other parts of the state and to operate in an auditorium or a high school or college so that people can come and observe what really goes on. How is this system actually operating? What happens? And they see that when a case comes before the Supreme Court of Alabama, that both sides get to be there at the same time and say what they want to say about the case. And the judges are there at the same time asking questions back and forth. I think it lends to two things: a better understanding of the function and the operation of the courts, and hopefully will instill confidence in the citizens who observe that process.
What about the people? Do you feel that the people better understand or are beginning to better understand the court system, what their rights are, what they can do, what they probably can't do, this kind of thing? Do you see that changing?
I think so, but that's a very, very slow process because you just simply can't go out with 3.8 million citizens of the state of Alabama and tell them or educate the citizens what their rights are and what their obligations are. But I see it better because we have gone to the high schools and to the colleges and had forums and have furnished educational materials. What we really want citizens to become involved and become interested, because the process of government is really a response to citizens' needs. And we see that as an obligation, and we are taking that obligation and that opportunity and doing something about it.
When we come back, we'll look at the individual components of the Alabama court system, and we'll find out how those components work with each other inside the system. To understand the court system here in Alabama, first, we need to define exactly what it is a court is supposed to do.
Well, you know, it's so simple that sometimes it's overlooked. Judges, courts simply decide disputes and controversies between and among citizens and the citizen and his government. And it's just that simple. I remember making this illustration that I claim that you owe me $50. And I'll tell you that you borrowed that money from me about a month ago and you haven't paid me and I want my money. And you deny that. Now, how do I collect that debt that I claim? I go into court. Otherwise, Skip, I could collect the debt because I'm stronger than you, or smarter than you, or I have some supervisory authority over you to make you pay me that debt. No, no indeed. The way that debt is settled, that controversy is settled, minor as it may be, and this is a minor one, is that I file a paper against you in court, and then you can answer that, and then there's a hearing held or trial. You can bring your witnesses, and I can bring my witnesses, and we get there at the same time before the court represented by the judge, and then he or she hears that evidence and makes a decision. Now, you say it's final, but of course you know that it can be reviewed, but ultimately it becomes final, and that's our system in this state and in this nation.
The overall structure of the court system in Alabama, go into that just a little bit, the way the system is structured here.
Well, there are several levels of courts, and these courts have different jurisdictions or subject matters that they deal with. For instance, if you're in a city or a municipality of any sort, you have a municipal court presided over by a municipal judge, sometimes called a city judge or city recorder. That judge would hear cases involving the violations of city ordinances, run a stop sign, public drunk, and he has certain punishments that judge can levy or impose. So that's at the city level. The next level is in the county. That district court has both civil and criminal jurisdiction. The criminal jurisdiction would be a highway violation, or an assault and battery, or petty larceny, or theft of a very small value in goods. On the civil side, if I claim that you owed me a debt of $50 or up to $5,000, you would sue me in the district court, and that's presided over by a district judge from that county. That district court doesn't have a jury. The judge decides that case. If you have a minor automobile accident, it would be in the district court. The next level is the circuit court. And most people know what circuit courts are in this state, presided over by a circuit judge. It's the court of general trial jurisdiction. Any kind of controversy or dispute not provided for in these other courts would go to the circuit court. The circuit court has a jury of 12 persons to assist that judge in making the final decision. That could be a rape case, a murder case, a robbery case. It could be a serious automobile accident. It could be a divorce case. It could be a case involving literally millions of dollars and life and death or property. Then that's the trial court system. The other level is called the appellate court system. If a person is dissatisfied with the decision of the trial court, let's say the circuit court, and says the circuit judge was wrong, the verdict was wrong, that person or that party has a right to appeal. We have 3 appellate courts. The Court of Criminal Appeals, who has appellate jurisdiction over criminal cases if an error was made. You have the Civil Court of Appeals, which is an appellate court that reviews cases of divorce, workman's compensation, and matters where the amount sued for or in controversy is $10,000 or less. Now, from those decisions of those two courts, that can be appealed to the Supreme Court. But the Supreme Court also has jurisdiction of direct appeals from circuit courts. So ultimately, the final decision at the state court level in Alabama is the Alabama Supreme Court. And it reviews cases to find out if an error was made, so that a citizen has several ways to have that case finally decided. And it's all in the scheme of things to give everybody the opportunity of another say up to a certain point.
Up until now, we've really been talking about within the court itself. What all is involved in the system, though, besides the court?
Well, of course, any court has support personnel. I view the court system overall as being jurors and witnesses and district attorneys who prosecute cases and law enforcement officers who investigate and bring cases to the attention of the prosecutor, the DA, the grand jury. Even after the case is over with, a person goes to prison. What the courts do really relates to how many prisons you need, or how many people the jury would convict. So while we're only concerned with adjudication, we know that our system, the criminal justice system, for instance, is composed of much more than just judges.
How are they selected? How do you find a judge? How do you decide this man or this woman is judge material?
Well, the reason I smile, I don't suppose that you find them. You have to be a licensed practicing attorney. You have to have that basic legal education and background. But really the selection process in Alabama is by popular election. Many states are moving away from that, somewhat similar to the federal system. But in Alabama, we simply, so far as I know, have always elected judges.
With that system, though, wouldn't you end up with either the most popular lawyer as a judge or the lawyer with the most money to campaign as opposed to the most qualified?
It's certainly possible, but it has not worked that way in practice. It's an honor to be a judge. It's a very solemn obligation and responsibility. And while we need to remove judges from partisan politics in the sense of making promises of what I do on the bench, yet and still you've got a certain amount of professionalism that those people trained in the law understand that the law is a jealous mistress, some people say, and you have an obligation to discharge your duties within the bounds of the law. And by and large, it's worked well in Alabama. Other systems, I'm sure, have worked equally well, that the people mandated this in the Constitution.
You said something a moment ago about it being an honor. Now, in at least one of our neighboring states, there has been a growing problem of probably the best qualified attorneys not wanting to be judges. Pay scale, for one thing, is a problem, I know. Do we have that kind of situation here in Alabama?
We have had that problem, and the legislature has ameliorated that problem in recent years. They recognize that if you're going to get quality people, you have got to provide adequate compensation and benefits. Sometimes that's been controversial. I hope those days are behind us. And I think that by and large our system has worked, and it's working better now. Judges have to sacrifice something to be a judge, but of course it's a public office, and it is an honor to serve.
What about the judge and the jury? What exactly is that relationship? How does that work?
Well, the jury, of course, is made up of 12 citizens who are selected, and a jury is a most important part of the justice system for this simple reason. Those 12 citizens actually decide the facts of a case. You swear under oath one way and I swear under oath the other way. It's up to the jury to decide who's telling the truth. What are the true facts? Now the judge in his role is a referee. the judge make rulings on the law. You can put this into evidence for the jury to consider, or you can't put a certain matter into evidence. And the judge's obligation is to instruct the jury. This is the law, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. But the jury decides those facts. And the function of that jury, I just can't say too much about how important it is.
While we're talking about the components of the system, let's talk a little bit about the law enforcement people. There was, a few years back, a great deal of coverage that I remember we were doing where cases would be made on the streets. It would get into court, and because of a technicality or because of something that was or was not said, the Miranda thing is what I had in mind, the case would be blown in court. It seems I haven't heard that as much in recent years. Is that a true perception? Has that changed? Are the law enforcement people getting some kind of training that makes them a better part of the system?
Yes, the Miranda issue is a very good issue to discuss. The United States Supreme Court has simply held some years ago that if you were charged with a crime, before your statement could be used against you, you had to be told of your rights. And a lot of the people in law enforcement didn't understand it or maybe disagreed with it. But that was the law as handed down by the United States Supreme Court. So it really meant that law enforcement personnel needed to be educated and trained. And we've done a good job in this state in better training, better quality of policemen and all law enforcement officers.
In just a moment, we'll look at recent changes in the court system here in Alabama, and then we'll look at the future of the system itself. What changes have you seen in the system itself since, within, say, the past 4 to 5 years?
One very significant change is a revamping of the selection and the use of citizens who serve on juries. And while this has not all been done in the past 4 years, I can look back on the jury system and can remember the time when a very small group of people selected another larger group to be the jurors in a particular county. And that system was not efficient. That system had problems in terms of a fair cross-section of the community to decide these important cases. We've made a lot of changes in the jury system. For instance, formerly, many people were exempt. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, any number of probably, newspaper people, media people were exempt. Locomotive engineers, steamboat pilots. We have swept away every exemption from jury duty in this state, and for a very good reason. Every citizen ought to be available to participate in the system of justice. And so now every person is assuming that they are, of course, not a felon, not convicted of a felony, can understand, read and write the English language, are all available under our law for jury service. And I think that bids well for the system to say that no one is exempt. A judge is not exempt. Couldn't sit on his own case, but a judge has in fact sat on a jury throughout this state in recent years. The other thing we've done in the jury system is to try to make it more efficient. When a person who's a citizen comes to court for the first time, it's a new and perhaps a strange experience. That citizen needs to be told what it's all about, how the system works. And we're doing that. We're trying to have orientation sessions for jurors. What's expected of a juror? We also are trying to attend to their needs in terms of accommodating them. Jury service is a public service. A citizen is not paid but $10 a day, and I would guess most citizens make more than that. And so we have an obligation in the court system to say and to do things for them to accommodate them because they're rendering public service and not being paid adequately for it.
Now let's look into the future. We talked a lot about what's happened recently and what's happening right now. What do you see coming? And let me start you with a question that I hear a lot about, and that is the perception that the country has gone lawsuit happy. That every time you turn around, someone's suing someone over something. Do you see that as a growing trend that's going to become a serious problem for not only the courts, but the people themselves?
Well, yes, it is. And while no one can tell you why all these things happen, those of us who live in America call upon the courts to solve a lot of problems. Why and how? You could debate about, but the truth of the matter is that courts are called upon more now than ever before to decide society's problems, whether it's wearing your hair too long in school or in the Army, or whether you can treat your child at a particular medical clinic that uses a controversial drug. You can just think of the things that evoke controversy, and they just simply end up in court. Now, some say that the reason more cases are in court is because the other institutions have not addressed and solved those problems. I think that the court system, the judicial system in Alabama, is a branch of government that's addressing its problems. It is so significant to see the numbers of cases increasing about at the percentage rate of inflation. So we've got 12% inflation, we'll have about 12% increase in caseloads. Now, all governments are called upon, more services are demanded, but the citizens' belts are tightened in terms of furnishing money to do these services. So our obligation is to do this. With more demand for court services, more cases, our obligation is to learn how to do it better and more efficiently. Now, we are making that kind of progress in the court system.
There's a system that's used now called contingency fees, where attorneys will take cases, and if they win, they're paid. If they don't win, they're not paid. How do you feel about that?
I think that they're probably necessary because of this factor. Not all people can afford to employ and pay a lawyer whether that person wins or loses. The person who is injured and doesn't have enough money to pay for the lawyer based on his time has to look for another means by which to handle the case. And so the lawyer says, and under ethical considerations, says, well, I'll take it on a contingent basis, which means if I win the case for you, citizen, and you are paid, then a percentage of what you get becomes my fee. That's one of the alternatives. The citizen could just as easily agree with the lawyer that if you go to court, I'll pay you a flat fee. But sometimes citizens can't afford to do that. So contingency fees, while criticized, they are really necessary, particularly for the injured party in modest or low economic circumstances.
Okay, so we have contingency fees, we have legal services, and we have a literal explosion of people suddenly understanding that they can take issues to court.
Yes, they do.
All right. Don't you see, though, a possibility that the entire system can be bogged down because we've got a population explosion to begin with, and more people getting involved in the legal process? Isn't it possible that the whole system could bog down because of this?
Yes, it is possible, but that's the reason that we are trying to become more efficient. But the point about so much litigation is a point that is being debated. But there's another side of the coin. If you don't afford the citizen some means, some fair means, some efficient means of settling that dispute, major or minor, then you really create a bigger problem, a frustrating problem, that the citizen has to do it another way. And then you're talking about anarchy.
People. If he seeks to eradicate and destroy programs designed to feed and to train people for jobs without substituting just as meaningful or more meaningful programs, we're prepared to resist him with massive nonviolent movement to prevent the rolling back of the clock.
The battle between House Commerce Subcommittee Chairman Benjamin Rosenthal of New York and the Chicago-based condominium converter Nicholas Golatis of American Invesco began in August. That's when Rosenthal targeted the company for investigation in the planned conversion of these apartments in Bethesda, Maryland. It was Rosenthal's suspicion that here and elsewhere, low and moderate income people were being exploited and displaced by speculators. Indeed, an interim staff report suggested that. From the beginning, American Invesco fought the subcommittee, calling on influential forces in the Capitol and refusing to turn over profit and loss records subpoenaed by the subcommittee. The firm even took out ads at $20,000 a crack, accusing a congressman of harassment. Well, that congressman, Rosenthal, today won the backing of a majority of his fellow subcommittee members and cited American Invesco for contempt of Congress. The battle, however, was not won easily.
We've singled out one firm for no apparent reason, other than it's a large firm and a successful firm. We're asking them to turn over their most confidential proprietary information. It's information that Couch doesn't require when they're investigating possible inflationary problems.
The only way that we can make these judgments and accumulate and assess all this material is by originally and initially pursuing that avenue of information from someone, in this case American Invesco, is involved in this conversion phenomena. There's no other way to find out.
The vote was 5-3 in favor of citing American Invesco with contempt. Afterwards, a company spokesman said he doubted the full Government Operations Committee, which will hear the matter tomorrow, will approve the subcommittee action. If it is upheld and no other compromise is possible, Nicholas Goletis could receive a $5,000 fine and 5 years in jail. Kelly Burke for NBC News, Washington.
That was our last story. We've dropped number 18, Quake, number 20, Gift.
And so on. What are the chances?
Years ago, when the weather was bad out in the rural Republican areas, those people wouldn't get to the polls, but Democrats got to go. And this time around, we have a good day tomorrow for Election Day. But first, let's take care of today, since that comes first. Outside for...
Out of Iran this morning, there were major new developments in Iran, raising hopes that the 52 American hostages may be released soon. The Ayatollah Khomeini met with the Iranian militants holding the hostages. They agreed to turn the hostages over to the Iranian government as a prelude to their release. And a short time later, Iran announced that Algeria has agreed to handle arrangements for turning the hostages over to the United States if this country meets Iran's 4 conditions. Meanwhile, Iran will continue to maintain custody of the hostages, who today complete a full year in captivity, 366 days. Tony McRae is an Australian journalist who has been covering the events in Iran. She is on the telephone now from Tehran. We're going to try to make contact with her. Ms. McRae, are you there?
Good morning.
Can you tell us what the situation is in the streets of Iran this morning? Are the people in the streets of Tehran talking about the release of the hostages?
They are indeed, and they have been ever since the decision was announced in the Majlis yesterday. The feeling here is that everything that Iran has set out to do has been already achieved, in as much as they have given President Carter the green light to go ahead and decide on the conditions. There is also a feeling here that unless America and the President replies to the conditions perhaps a little bit more definitely in the next few hours, there is that feeling that maybe some of these hostages will either be put on trial if he doesn't meet the conditions, or they will only be released gradually.
You mean that the United States must meet the conditions within a given period of time, 48 hours or this week, and do they have to meet them, in your judgment, specifically, or do they just have to agree to meet those conditions?
No, they're not looking for specifics, although I think at one stage the Parliament here did expect those specifics. What they're looking for is a fairly positive reaction from the United States on all 4 conditions. And they're a little bit surprised in some of these high-ranking circles that that hasn't been forthcoming yet.
Tony McRae, an Australian journalist who has been covering these developments in Tehran. These new developments in Iran, of course, have given new hope to the relatives and the hostages of the friends of the hostages. Earlier here on Today, I talked with Dorothy Limbert, the mother of hostage John Limbert.
This is a very good morning, actually, one of the best that I think I or the other families have experienced in the whole year. And, you know, it's a year as of yesterday or today. And I do think we can feel encouraged. Something is happening. There are contacts and negotiations, and I'm sure everyone will feel somewhat elated.
Greyhound bus service was uninterrupted this morning after a threatened strike against the nation's largest transportation company was averted just hours before the drivers were set to walk out. Union and company spokesman said the agreement was hammered out with the help of a federal mediator. Atlanta police ordered an autopsy today on the body of a black teenager who may have been the latest victim of a child killer stalking that city's poor black neighborhoods. Bob Jimenez reports.
The body was that of a black male in his early teens. Investigators believe he was placed beneath a bridge and carefully propped up along a riverbank. The discovery comes at a time Atlanta police are investigating the murders of 10 black children and the disappearance of 4 others. But police are not ready to say if this case is related.
Without specifying the cause of death, does it look like foul play of some kind? We're not in a position to make that determination. We are not going to negate any possibility. We shall await until we receive the final report from the medical examiner before making an official statement.
But one report says a medical technician found marks on the victim's neck, indicating strangulation, the cause of death in at least 4 other murder cases. The report also said Atlanta police were looking for a missing 13-year-old black child over the weekend. Police won't confirm this. But a community already anxious and alarmed may fear the worst. Bob Jimenez, NBC News, Atlanta.
Well, the ballot will be a bit longer than candidate for president and vice president. As you know, there are many key House and Senate races that are in great question as we approach Election Day. We'll be looking at those in a moment, but first a message.